I do a lot of church growth consulting, and I think that keeps me sharp as a professor because I'm in the field every week working with the church, trying to understand how we can better reach people with God's good news. And of course, the good news is that God wants a relationship with his offspring. So as I went through and worked with churches, I found that churches tended to focus on part of people's spiritual journey. Like I'd go to some of the mainline churches that would hire me, and they would be focused upon social action, helping someone get a job, helping someone get out of an abusive relationship, helping someone learn English. But they didn't really focus much upon the presentation of what it meant to accept Christ. And I found many times these people would get kind of cleaned up in a mainline church, and then these people would wind up years later in more of an evangelical church because they were searching for an explanation of what conversion was and why they needed to turn their life over to Christ. And then I found that other churches specialized on the discipleship journey. And they would be involved in small groups and cell churches. And really what I saw is that churches were breaking up the spiritual journey of people. And people would have to like leap from one church to the next to get to the next stage in their spiritual growth. And I also noted that a lot of researchers found that people didn't make these leaps, that they would get connected with one church, they would feel like they weren't getting what they needed for the next step. And instead of finding another church that would help them with that next step, many people just kind of dropped off the radar. Many people just didn't find that next church and wound up being non-church goers. So I had a guy in one church who told me, he said he went to the Catholic Church because they helped him. He said they were the first Christians he met because they helped him get a job and they helped him get off the streets. And then he said, then he went to a Baptist church because that was where he heard about salvation and he got baptized. He said, then he went to a Vineyard church because he was looking for finding his spiritual gifts and finding what he was supposed to do in the body of Christ. And the Vineyard church was better at that. So I noticed that churches were focusing on narrow bands of people's spiritual journey. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could look at how people progress spiritually and if we could track that and track it like a journey and notice that there's certain points people go through on that journey. Everybody goes through the points in the same order, but at different paces. So some people may cover several points in like a 6-month period of time. Some people might take 6 years. So I developed this thing of spiritual waypoints from interviewing hundreds of people and also based on the work of James Engel and Bobby Clinton from Fuller Seminary, who had looked at these similar type of spiritual growth points.
It's interesting because as I was reading, I thought that this whole metaphor of journey made perfect sense. And yet my question to you, Bob, is why is it that a lot of times we are not viewing our lives as a journey?
Yeah, I think the problem is that in American society, we really like to focus on the event. Like we like to say, when did you get saved? And do you have a point when you gave your life to Christ? And some scholars like Richard Peace at Fuller Seminary and Scott McKnight, they have done great work at noting that a lot of people don't have a point of conversion. In fact, if you look in the New Testament, most of the disciples didn't appear to have a point of conversion. Now, certainly Paul did, and we know about that, but we don't see similar points of this dynamic change overnight in Peter or the other disciples. So the point of Richard Peace at Fuller Seminary, is one of my mentors on my PhD, is that people go through periods and points, and they tend to focus on the journey, not the position. But the people on the outside focus on the position. They say, when did you get saved? But a spiritual traveler will say, well, I'm not really sure, but I know at some point my life changed. So I think it's taken it back to helping people understand the individuals rather than us as a church trying to put on it certain points and say, what point are you in the journey, to say so people can identify themselves where they are in this progress.
Do you think part of the problem is that somewhere in church DNA we desire to create cookie cutter Christians?
Yeah, I think you're right, Heath. I think people want to be, you say, well, I'm at this stage and you must be at this stage too. The problem is when we focus too much upon one point, people get stuck at that point. And I grew up in the holiness movement in the Church of God Anderson. Now I'm a member of the Wesleyan Church, and we always emphasized your testimony about when you got saved. But I thought as I was growing up, I'd like to hear about people who found their spiritual gift. That's something that takes place later. And I'd like to hear some stories about that would help me find my spiritual gift when I was a young person in church trying to decide what I was called to do. So I think that we tend to put people into certain categories. Yeah. And rather I want people to see, and I think this resonates very much with younger generations, see that we're on a journey and we're fellow travelers and we need to help one another. So I just pointed out, here are the 16 most common points that people go through in their spiritual journey, and it helps you identify where people are at. And in the book, I give you examples of how to help people to the next point.
Talk to us a little bit. You deal in this book with this dichotomy that we often have in the church of evangelism and then the social action, and both of these we know are different, outgrowth of the gospel, and yet we seem to get polarized on these.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'm trying to help people get over, is that most of the time when I talk to people and I ask them why, because I interview people at all of my consultations. I interview people in the community, I interview people in the church, I interview people, who are new Christians. And oftentimes I hear people say is that they were skeptical of evangelicals because evangelicals were only interested in saving their souls. They weren't interested in helping them come up to that place in life where they're ready to contemplate saving their souls. And I do use a lot of these quotes in the books by people like Billy Graham and others who, said we need to hold out the hand of fellowship and also a cup of cold water. And there was a good psychologist, Abraham Maslow, that said people have to have their more basic needs met before they have higher needs met. And the most basic need is to have a safe, secure, regular support and income, a place where you feel safe. And many of these social ministries address that. But then when we disconnect the conversion process to it, we get a lot of people who get cleaned up, but they don't know that there is supernatural power from God through the Holy Spirit to actually convert their life in a new direction, change it and go in another direction, and they could be a changed person. So we want to connect the social change with the personal change.
Well, this jumped out at me, and for those that are regular listeners to this show, Steve and I have had this ongoing conversation about Wesley, and that is that in the evangelical movement at large, there are a number of people who simply don't understand that Wesley is one of the very few in church history that seems to take this tension, and he walks the tightrope. And he unfurls two flags, and it is the social aspect of the gospel. It is also the salvific aspect of the gospel. And so we are not without example here. I mean, this has been done.
Exactly. And so when I go to these churches that are making an impact, that are reaching people, and we see a high rate of people converting to Christ, not transfer growth. Transfer growth in the church growth movement is something we don't care to look at because it's not what we're interested in. We're interested in conversion growth. A person's life converts to a new way. When you look at churches that are having large and high rates of conversion growth, you find very socially active and evangelistically active churches. So the churches that balance this. Now, we've known this for years. The Lausanne Conference on World Evangelism, John Stott wrote a thing for them and said that social action and conversion are like two wings of a bird. You can't fly without both. He said they're like two oars of a boat. And I thought, that's true. Most of our churches have one oar in the water, and we're going around in circles. And you can't move forward without both oars. So that's a good analogy, I think, from some of our leaders about how we need social, what Wesley would, what we've called about Wesley, social holiness and spiritual holiness.
Yeah. Also, another thing I like about this book, there is clearly a community dimension to this. Talk a little bit about the importance of the idea that we're not on this journey alone.
Well, the book that Heath has, you're giving away a couple of the main book called Spiritual Waypoints, but there's an accompanying book that Heath has that's called Waypoint. And it basically tells you how to, hey, there you go. There he is. Thank you, Vanna. The book is basically designed to give you questions and conversation starters with people at different points on the spiritual journey. So you notice, hey, I've got a neighbor. They seem to have, they don't believe in God. How do I explain to them who Jesus is, who God is, and how he is different, superior, and the only God, different from the other gods? So-called gods. I have a chapter that explains how to help a neighbor understand that. And it's in both those books, but the book you go through with the neighbor is that small book that Heath was holding up. So the idea is that there's two books. One's the textbook, but the other one's kind of a manual you take with you out to when you connect with people. And they say, hey, I don't believe in God. I believe that all routes lead to God. Well, I have a chapter in there that explains when Jesus said, no one comes to the Father but through me, he meant it, and why Jesus and his message is different from the other religions. I have a comparative chapter, compares the different religions, and it has questions you can discuss with this person. So it's like a conversation starter. In fact, that's really important because the American Religious Identification Survey found out that the fastest growing group in America, the fastest growing segment of Americans are the ones who are atheistic or agnostic. And that is 25% of North American culture today is atheistic or agnostic. So that means out of one of every four people we meet, we've got to explain to them why Jesus is God and there aren't any other gods. And most churches are unaware of how to do that. So what I try to do is address how to help people at any of these stages, especially these early stages.
One of the things that I kind of walked away with from the book here, or both these books, is this idea that even, let's talk about the atheist for a moment. Even with the atheist, my mind has changed a little bit in that I just see them on the journey. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just at a different point here, and it's kind of tied into the culture where I have been saying for years that spirituality is a very popular thing, even outside of the church. Yeah. And so all these people, curious, one of the questions we have is, so how did you come up with this idea of Oksana in the edition here that Heath has held up?
Sure. Well, in that version that I wrote for people to share with their friends and people on the journey, I wrote a story, a fictitious story, but it's based upon real life experiences of people I've met. And I talked about a woman named Oksana who comes from the Midwest, grew up in the church, but doesn't feel like she believes in God. She believes in no God at first. And she goes out to Australia on a vacation, and there, while camping in the outback and being hosted by these Aboriginal people, she starts to see that they believe in God, and it starts to impress her that maybe there is God up there. So she starts this quest for God, and it takes her through all these events in her life. She's there at 9/11. She's there one Christmas on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. She's at these various places that people would recognize. In fact, one of my friends, who is a pastor out in New York City, and he was a pastor there at the church right at Ground Zero, he shared with me his story, and I wrote him in and his real story into her story. So it's a story of how she went through these 16 waypoints. See, half these waypoints are leading up to a experience with Christ where there is a conversion that happens. But the other six, or the other half, deal with our spiritual journey into fulfilled ministry. So if people are out there saying, hey, how do I find my gifts? I got a chapter on helping you find your gifts. How do I find the right ministry that matches my gifts? I have a chapter on that. And I trace her through all of these events, including through her eventual becoming a missionary in India, working with young ladies because the problem of bride burning, which is still a problem in India today, and eventually to her death. But it tracks her through her family, through her offspring. And so many people have told me that the story of Oksana is worthy of being published out there and pushed out there as a book all of its own. But one thing you said, Tony, that was, I think, really important is that this book has the spiritual waypoints in lieu of having the story of Oksana, has the story of 16 national leaders and how they went through these waypoints. And it got me thinking as you said about atheists, Richard Peace tells this great story, and I interviewed him in the book, and he was in South Africa doing this evangelistic crusade. I think it was for navigators, maybe InterVarsity, one of those, and they had a large rally with a multimedia presentation. And the multimedia presentation had rock music, and it had slides back in those days, and it was very dark in the first half, showing how the world was in dire need of help. And the second half was very positive and uplifting. It was showing that Christ was the answer. And at the end of the crusade, a guy came up to Richard. He said, "Richard," he goes, "I'm the president of the Atheist Club here at the University of South Africa." And Richard said he didn't even know there was such a thing as an atheist club. And here's the president. And so, and the president says, "Your presentation has made a big impact on me." And so Richard's thinking, "Oh man, he's gonna get saved. He'll give his testimony here tomorrow night. The president of the Atheist Club gets saved." And the guy says, "This has made such a profound effect on me." He said, "No longer am I an atheist. I'm an agnostic." And Richard thought, "Oh man, there goes the testimony." But really, he thought of it later. He thought, I helped that person move one step closer to Christ.
This is kind of like Anthony Flew, the Anthony Flew story. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but leading atheist in the UK. His father was a Wesleyan Methodist pastor. They're not the same as us. That's kind of the British version. Mm-hmm. But he moves from being the most pronounced atheist, most passionate spokesman for that point of view, to where he said, there is a God. I just don't know what he's like. Mm-hmm. And of course, several of us were hanging on to the hope that he would come all the way into Christianity and make that confession. But what you're articulating is this openness that we Christians have not felt in a long time, to let God be God in people's lives, in the sense that we don't have to push them to a premature decision and say, yes, accept this little list of presuppositions and then you're okay. But actually, you're saying, let's have a relationship with God. Just open up to him.
Yes. And, I want to see people come to a relationship with Jesus Christ. I focus on that in the book. I say that's the most important waypoint of all of them.
Right.
But we don't understand that oftentimes there's these pre-waypoints that people have to go through in preparation for that conversion experience. Right. And sociologists like James Engel and Bobby Clinton from Fuller Seminary, they've tracked this and noted that people go through these points. And so I really built on their work, adding my own and then putting together both of their scales into one scale and saying, this is a process and we need to help people at the next step. But the most important step is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Well, just thinking back, wasn't it that way for C.S. Lewis and many others? I mean, it was out of that the Inklings Club, where they would get together in a pub of all things, and and of course drank Diet Coke and talked about spiritual matters. If we could somehow allow God. I guess what I want to say, and I don't know how to say it on the air, is we don't have farms where you go to conceive children and you do things step 1, step 2, step 3. There's a relationship generally for us that is so much more rich and complex than just that pure mechanical approach. And it ought to be that way in the spiritual realm.
Yes, and so that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to say, look, let's map out how people come to know Christ, and let's see that there's certain points they pass through. And that's why I called them waypoints, because on a GPS, you can put a waypoint on somewhere that means a place that means something to you.
Right.
And these may happen at different times, different locales. Even sometimes the waypoints take place some real quick, some real slow. But everybody goes through these, and we need to be ready to help people reach the next one. So we're really like navigators,
Right.
and helping people, and that's why the subtitle is, helping people navigate the journey.
Dr. Whitesel, do you think that a lot of times Christians think they're further along in the process than they actually are, that they think they're at maybe a 3 or 2 and they're really just baby Christians?
That's a good question. The listeners may not realize, but I start in these waypoints with 16 being the furthest away, and 0 being the one where we go to be with God in heaven. And so so it counts down. So the lower waypoints are actually higher along on the spiritual journey, or further along. So your point of like 2 or 3, that's a person who's been a Christian. You become a Christian at like point 7.
Right.
Point 6 is a post-decision evaluation. Almost all people have this. They ask themselves, hey, is this really going to be worth it?
Yeah.
Then they get connected to the body, but in incorporated or connected to a church in 5. But in 3 and 2, that's where they find their spiritual vocation. They say, this is what I'm called to do. And I tell a good story of Tony Campolo, because Tony was a very successful, he gave me an interview for this book. And so if they want to read the interview, it's right there. But he was a very successful Ivy League professor, but he hadn't found his call. And it was through a story that I share in the book where he was in South America, I believe it was, and he had an encounter with people who were very poor, starving and dying, and he realized that Christians weren't aware of the great needs in the 2/3 world. And he found his spiritual vocation. It was to teach people about the needs of the needy around the world. And so I talk about how you can find your spiritual vocations. I encourage your listeners, that if they're looking for something to find out what they're supposed to do, what are they called to do? What is the ideal job that God has for them? There's chapters in this book that deal with that too. It's not just about coming to Christ, it's about serving him, and effectively as well.
Wow.
Well, Bob, as we wrap this up, we know that you have another project that's in the hopper, the book Organics. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this will be another one of my Abingdon Press books, United Methodist Publishing House. Really honored that Dan Kimball wrote the foreword for this. But this is basically Organics, Organix, is basically the 8 leadership changes. These are the things you're going to have to shift in your leadership to reach out to people under 35. Most churches are dying because they can't reach people under 35. And I work with churches that do reach people under 35, and I work with churches that don't and are helping them do so. And what I've done is I've outlined the 8 things that you need to change in your leadership style. And it really, in each one of these letters, Organics, is a symbol that represents the one of the lessons. So like one of the lessons, the G is a graffiti G. It looks like it's been spray painted. And it stands for, we have to, in our leadership, have more of a multicolored leadership. We need to reflect the environment. Most of our churches are unicultural. They're focused in on one culture, but if we look around, we'll find a culture in our communities drastically changing. And we must change in our leadership makeup, or the congregation won't change in its makeup. Most people try and change the church congregation, then the leadership will change. Starts at the top. Yeah. I talk about mosaic churches, some of the social action elements I've talked about here. We've talked about that. So a lot of important, timely topics. I know of no other book that addresses all of these topics for tomorrow's leader. So it'll be out to October 1.
All right, and I know you're a professor at Wesley Seminary at IWU, so what classes are you teaching now this fall?
Well, I'll be teaching one called Missional Leadership, and it deals with how to become a missional church. I'll be teaching one on church leadership, and also teaching one on nonprofit management, and another course on growing a multi-generational ministry. And, I think probably people who are technologically savvy and watch your show or listen to the podcast or see the YouTube video, they should know that we have a seminary that's almost entirely online. We designed it that way from the ground up. We started with a bunch of us who were seminarians who were a little discouraged by the material we got in seminary. We felt it wasn't practical enough for what we were going to do once we got out. So we have designed a practical seminary that's online from the ground up. And we have some of the top-notch faculty here, top-notch administrators. Our vice president, head of our seminary, pastored a mega church that he planted and grew it into a mega church, and then changed it into a multi-ethnic church and turned it over to an African-American pastor. And this is the guy that's helping lead us. So you can see that we have people with these variety of real-life experiences in this new, 21st century cultural mosaic that are making disciples for Christ. So that's our goal here at our seminary, and they can just come to indwes.edu and click on Wesley Seminary and find out about our curriculum, and you can stay in your church, stay local, and still go to seminary and get a Master of Art or a Master of Divinity.
Yeah, and let me just put a plug there. If you're a Wesleyan pastor, with the scholarships that you get through the denomination and scholarships that Indiana Wesleyan is offering to Wesleyan pastors, this is very affordable. So encourage you to just take them up on that.
I also want to point people, before we leave, to a resource from The Gathering. They have the recording, Dr. Whitesel, of your seminar that you taught there, which was fantastic, and I would recommend, if people go take a look at that. I've got the link in the chat room. We'll also have it in the show notes, but you go into maybe a little bit more depth and time than what we've been able to today, but be sure to check that out, guys.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for giving us your time, and blessings on you. And if ever you want to use our show as a platform to get a message out, you certainly have the green light to do that.
Hey, thanks very much, Tony. It's been a blast being with all of you. I'm excited about what you're doing, wedding technology with training. And that's what we're doing at Wesley Seminary. So we'll partner a lot in the future, I'm sure. So thanks for having me on, and God bless.
Thank you. Hey, thank you very much.
All right. Real quick, Matthew, why don't you again just tell our listeners in the chat room, from those that might have come late, how they can win a book.
All right. Today we are giving away 2 copies of, well, not technically today, but 2 copies of Spiritual Waypoints. You can win one in our chat room by going to thetechologyshow.com/live. You'll see the chat room right there. Just let us know that you want in the drawing. We've got a good list of names right now, but we've got a little bit more time, another half an hour where we can add some more. So be sure to do that. And then you can also get in by going to Facebook and tagging our show. That's for the other copy. So go to Facebook. You can do it right now. And tag the Techology Show after liking our page, and let us know that you would like to be entered for a copy of Spiritual Waypoints by Dr. Bob Whitesel.
All right. Before we get to the download of the week, I want to do a little bit of explanation on our segment, They Said It. When we get to the last They Said It, this is actually going to be a video clip of Bill Hybels. It's out of a 7-minute video clip where he is responding to Howard Schultz pulling out of the leadership conference at Willow Creek this week. And one of the reasons that we're including that this week is because I think a lot of times the church takes touchy situations and they make them worse because we don't handle them in a manner that's consistent with the gospel, or puts the church in even a worse light. And I think that on this particular issue, Hybels does a great job. So I just want to kind of prepare you for that and let you know why we're doing the They Said It the way that we are. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
Oh.
Download of the week.
Our download of the week is Glary Utilities. Now, some of you may recognize that name because I recommended this about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and the only checking I did was through CNET. They have vetted it, so you can download it there at downloads.com. But last week, I had a friend, I was visiting in New York, and someone gave him a computer, and it was bogged down. And so I decided to actually try Glary Utilities and fell in love with this. It cleaned up the register. It spoke to the startup, what programs were starting up. I was able to go in and kill the ones I knew that didn't need to start up, deleted some programs. And so if you're on a PC, a Windows-based machine, highly, highly, highly recommend Glary Utilities.
Marcy in the chat room says
one negative about it is that when you go to install it, it will ask you, it will say, I accept the license agreement and want to install the Ask toolbar. Well, I'm tired of...
I got around that.
Yeah, all you have to do, it makes it sound as if you don't select that, you're not going to get it. But just deselect it. It will still install, and it works fine.
Yeah. Okay. And someone in the chat room?
Said that the bogged down with spyware or junk was an understatement, Marcy says. It was more than bogged down.
Yeah, Marcy tried to use it. She tried to type her blog on it, and there were 4 or 5 toolbars loaded on the thing. There were advertisements. It was crazy. All right, let's move on to They Said It.
Oh, gracious.
Let's do that.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
Pastoral ministry, evangelism, missions, counseling, and music are all by the nature of the disciplines incarnational, not mechanical. To think otherwise is as ludicrous as believing the Navy SEALs who took down Osama bin Laden had received all of their training online. Paige Patterson, president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, explaining why he thinks theological education needs to include the sacrifice of enrolling into a resident program. Source, Southern Baptist Texan.
When I see that the content involves a token nod to abstinence and an emphasis on safer sex practices, I'm reminded of a saying made popular by Alcoholics Anonymous. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting different results. Medical Dr. Ann Nolte in her New York Post opinion article entitled Why Today's Sex Education Won't Work. Source, Fox News.
This is the next step in building their position in the mobile world so they can distribute Google products and services through mobile phones and tablets. They want a success with the Android platform, and this will enhance their position in the mobile marketplace as well as defend their position to the patent portfolio. Analyst Clayton Moran commenting on Google's $12.5 billion purchase of Motorola Mobility. Source, Bloomberg.
In the last 7 days, an online petition was started to boycott Starbucks if Howard Schultz did not cancel his signed contract to this event. The issue driving this petition, which so far has been signed by 717 people, is homosexuality. The petition claims that Willow Creek Community Church is anti-gay. Therefore, if the president of Starbucks speaks here, then Starbucks should be boycotted, or so the thinking goes. Now, Howard and his leadership team had a tough decision to make. Jim Mayato and I spent 45 minutes in a very constructive conversation with the senior leaders at Starbucks, explaining to them in no uncertain terms that Willow is not anti-gay. But at the end of the day, they decided that the downside business risk was just too high for them, so Howard and his team decided to cancel, and we agreed to let him out of his contract without any penalty. Now, this whole thing is sad to me on a number of different levels. First, if the organizers of this petition had simply taken the time to call us, we would have explained to them, as we have to many others, that Willow is not only not anti-gay, Willow is not anti-anybody. Our church was founded... Our church was founded on the idea that people matter to God. All people. All people of all backgrounds, colors, ethnicities, and sexual orientations. The mat at every door on this campus has always read, "Welcome." And for over 35 years, we have flung the doors of this campus open to the widest array of humanity I have ever witnessed in a local church. And thousands, tens of thousands, have come to learn the teachings of Jesus. So to suggest that we check sexual orientation or any other kind of issue at our doors is simply not true. Just ask the hundreds of people with same-sex attraction who attend our church every week. Now, what is true is that we challenge homosexuals and heterosexuals to live out the sexual ethics taught in the scriptures, which encourages full sexual expression between a man and a woman in the context of marriage, and prescribes sexual abstinence and purity for everybody else.
I just really want to recommend that you watch the whole 7 minutes of this. It is spectacular.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that spectacular with a spat?
Yeah, because this goes a step beyond spectacular. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, T.
I think the thing that I especially love about what he said is that the church speaks to not just the church speaks to sexual purity across the board,
Right.
not just to homosexuals but also to heterosexuals. And I thought, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Just the way he said it. I really
He
liked
makes in his 7 minute, this whole 7 minute speech, he talks about politics of the day. He gets into that a little bit, and he thinks that in microcosm, this is a great example of the problem that we have with politics. And now this is my paraphrase, but we talk at, but we don't talk to.
Right.
And one of the things that Willow Creek's they're trying to do is they're seeking to sit down with those that started the petition. They are still wanting, and he said, and we're using Matthew 18 as our model to do that. We want that conversation with them. And you heard him at the beginning here say, if they would have contacted us up front, we think we could have answered their questions for them.
Right. Yeah.
So it is it's just a wonderful response. So let's talk a little tech. We haven't talked a lot of tech here in 3 or 4 weeks. So Google buys Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion.
$12 billion.
That's your average salary for a Wesleyan pastor. Not counting perks and benefits.
I've heard, all kinds of speculation on this. Now I've had 3 or 4 days of just listening to people.
It makes it interesting for Samsung, for HTC, for Asus, anybody that's in the market of building an Android phone. It makes it so interesting. And what I thought after hearing this, my initial reaction was, there is no better time for Hewlett-Packard to get WebOS out, not as just an OS that runs on their devices, but make it to where, license that out to other people too. Granted, they'd still be making hardware that goes with their software, but I think Google, by doing this, has opened the door to somehow make their hardware better than what HTC or whatever could make, and give more perks to their Motorola. They now own Motorola's hardware. But it could be interesting too. I mean, because if we wanted to see a really smooth implementation of Android on a device in the same way that iOS is a really smooth implementation of software married with good hardware, maybe this will result in that.
Yeah.
So do you think, is Google, so far Google's approach has been, we want to get Android on as many phones as possible. Which is they're trying to get it out there. The problem is, you get some Android phones that they get, people think, well, this is just as good as the iPhone. Then you get other Android phones that get 1 star. And my thing is Google, in 3-4 years, are they going to be at the point where Motorola makes the Android phone? Because one of the things with the iPhone, there ain't 5 different iPhones. It's the iPhone. And Apple is to say that Apple is meticulous in what goes out with their name on it is an understatement.
Yeah, and if they're not perfection.
But if you need an example of that, look at the iPhone release schedule right now. Every year it's been in July for the past 4 years. Yeah. Every new iPhone's come out in July. When's the iPhone 5 coming out? doesn't look like till October. I'm dying because, well, Ashley's the one dying because she's still she's waiting for the hand-me-down of the iPhone 4, and she's still running an iPhone 3G, which is getting old now. Like, it's starting to show its age big time. So, like, if you talk about it, they are being careful in how they release stuff. They don't just throw stuff out there. They're meticulous about it, to the point where they've delayed this new device until it's ready to go, which is probably not until early October.
And they're good. I'll give them their due, but they're not God, because I could sit here and I could talk for an hour about points that were in the BlackBerry, very useful to business and enterprise, that you just don't have here.
My contention with you on that, Steve, is that you will never, ever officially hear Apple say that they're building the iPhone as an enterprise device. Now, you'll hear other people say that, and there have been adaptations to try to get it into enterprise. But you're never going to hear Apple. That's not why they're producing the iPhone.
Yeah, but some of these things you would want no matter if you're in enterprise or not. I mean, the ability to choose greater than 2 days advance warrant. What student going to college wouldn't like to be able to put in, I'm speaking from seminary experience now, the deadlines for different things and have a week or two heads up, hey, make sure that paper's underway by this time. But you can't do it with this. So the workaround is you go to Google, you go to Google's calendar. I know what you're saying.
And that's what I do. I use Google Calendar to do that.
There are a lot of things.
In BlackBerry, you can do it directly.
That with all the thought and really the over market researching that goes on to produce one of these, I'm baffled that they never got a clue about some of this stuff.
Well, again, they're not making it for enterprise.
Yeah, but whether it's enterprise or not, that's my point. Whether it's enterprise or not, I'm still baffled that with all their very thorough research and development of these things, they don't come up with these things.
I would say it's because of their research they don't. In other words, they don't see that as a market.
What do 90% of the people need 90% of the time?
That's right.
That's the way they operate. What do 90% of the people need 90% of the time? The 10% that need a little something extra, or of that 90, that other 10%, you have to look for ways.
Steve, you have to look for a real
man. The calendar application
demographic.
No, that's the holdup.
No, but this is an enterprise thing. No, I get it. I've been on BlackBerry. I get it.
I don't get it because I can set alerts on my calendar.
No, you can't.
No, yes, I can. They pop up that email me. I can set up an alert that emails me to say you've got a paper due.
Hold on, Heath. How would you respond to what he's just said? Do you remember the day at the coffee shop showing Steve how to do it directly on Apple's calendar?
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, you can't.
I could. What
you can buy an app. You can go to Google, but you
right.
can't do it within the phone.
Right. What are you trying to do in the phone?
Yeah,
alert.
But
I'm gonna try.
All right,
I will figure this out.
Go ahead.
But here's the thing: is, I was telling you guys my story. Took my Mac in, didn't really know the complete issues with it. I just knew it was dead. The guy looked at it. He said, "I don't think it doesn't look like there's any, major liquid damage." He said, "I'm going to send it off and they'll fix it and send it back to you." I'm like, "Well, what if it is liquid damage? How much is it going to cost?" He's like, "Nope, you're good." And he said, "We're going to take care of this for you." And I'm telling you,
oh yeah,
that's when it hit me. I'm like, that's why I spent this much money on this computer.
I won't argue with you there. On the customer service end of things, they have it over everybody else I've ever met in the computer business, which is probably the explanation for why they're doing so
let's try
well
to bring this full circle and put it back to Motorola and Google. Google is not known for their fantastic customer support. If you had an issue with Google or you needed to talk to somebody, how would you do that?
And there are more landfills filled with Motorola phones and
you won't.
Well, that's just because they were on the forefront of cell phones in general. I mean, that's I think that's a moot point. But how do you do that? That's something now that Google has never really had to be a part of, is customer service. What does it mean to actually run a factory, to have actual physical products out there that now you've got to support? We need to see, and I'm excited to see, because I think they can do it, and I think that they can do it well. How do they offer customer support? How do they respond to this? And I think they can do a good job, but time will tell.
And it will be interesting to see, now they control hardware and software. What can they develop now that? See, I mean, this is, and I say this: has Apple won? I think Apple has proved if you can control hardware and software, you can give the user a better experience.
Yes.
Jeremy, who's one of Google's, a Google developer, all that kind of stuff. He said,
my daughter says,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steve.
I'm sorry. I thought you were through right there. You go.
Jeremy's. He says if you need good customer support from Google, fly down to Mountain View and camp. Set up a tent out on the lawn of the Google campus,
like
and eventually somebody will come out and help you.
My daughter says Apple doesn't sell here. South Korea is where she is. Android's the number one choice. Apple is old news in Korea.
There you go. So this thing that Steve wrote, this thing that he read, Dr. Ann Nolte has this article in the New York Post entitled "Why Today's Sex Education Won't Work." This medical doctor, and in some ways, I thought this was kind of old news yet refreshing. And this has been the message of the church that this, it's not working. And when are we going to wake up to there's another dimension to this? It's just not a matter of educating.
One of the most overused movie lines, and yet justifiably so, is
you can't handle the truth.
That's it. That's it right there. You can't. People cannot handle the truth.
Why on this issue?
We want to believe that somehow we can defy the laws of physics and every other law that God has instituted. We know innately that if we go down to Peachtree Plaza in Atlanta and go up on one of those skyscrapers and step off the edge, that we're not going to fly. We're not even going to drift to the ground. We're going to hit it, and they're going to have about a 6-hour cleanup job. Because the laws do apply. But we want to live in relationships especially as if we can just thumb our nose at all the rules that mandate and regulate.
You think about it. I know we've talked about Rob Bell on here before. He has a great book, Sex God, and just love that book. He talks a lot about the Jewish cultures and how you have the marriage ceremony and you have the marriage feast and you have the marriage celebration, and when that marriage has been consummated, the father of we're getting into some stuff here today. The father of the bride goes and gets the sheet to prove her virginity, and I'm telling you that is such a foreign, and that was what's the word I'm trying? It was a what's the word? Like a banner of, look, this is we have raised our daughter. Yeah. She is pure.
It's a badge of honor.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Steve. It's a badge of honor, and there's no honor today.
I 3 weeks ago in Sunday school class, I played 2 video clips, and it's from the documentary Live at the Troubadour. Troubadour is this club in Southern California where James Taylor, Carole King, Elton John, the Eagles, they all get their start at this club. And in this documentary, 90-minute documentary, you have Crosby, of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He has this statement where he says, from the beginning of birth control, the birth control pill up to AIDS, the sex was really good. And he says it 3 times, and he ends by saying, "Did I say that the sex was really good?"
Yeah.
And in that same documentary, you have Carole King, and I played the whole song for the Sunday school class. You have Carole King's song that is featured in this thing, and the song is "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?" And she talks about, okay, I get this. This is a one-night thing, and I'm yours completely tonight. But it's got this one question.
Yeah.
Will you still love me tomorrow? And you see this tension. And you talk about, you can't handle the truth. And so you have Crosby who's saying, oh, this was great. And at the same time, you have the music, which is the philosophy, saying, you know what, I just feel like I'm getting burned by this. And isn't there something beyond this?
And there are people who are dismissive of the very statement you made, and their reply would be, that's just a song. That's pop culture. But these things come from somewhere. And I think that's perfectly illustrated in the recent death of Amy Winehouse. If you listen to her songs, they're just songs, but obviously now in retrospect, we're seeing that there was a lot of that connected to who she was and what she was going through. And culturally, you've identified it. These are the gasps and the whispers of a culture, the songs that you're mentioning, that has fed on this banquet that they were promised. They could eat all they wanted. It wouldn't make them fat, and it wouldn't clog their arteries. And now they're waddling their way around, wondering where the nearest cardiologist is because they need some serious help.
Very good.
And we've got the help, but we're over here in the corner.
Yeah.
Hey, Heath, you emailed me this story about Paige Patterson at Southwestern. So, I mean, he was pretty tough in there. He feels like a resident program. None of this online stuff.
Yeah, he basically felt like if you did, which I thought it was great because I knew we were having Dr. Whitesel today, and I appreciate what he said about Wesley Seminary, and I think it's a tough article. I mean, he was very much, of course, he is the president of a seminary, but I don't think Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary is going to be going to an online option anytime soon.
He makes an interesting argument. I think it's a very good, very good question to ask.
Yes.
My fear is this: that we are beyond the point, though, of whether he makes a good argument. This goes back to my statement about, Ohm Malik of GigaOhm made this statement that 20 years ago, systems drove networks. Mm-hmm. And so businesses were trying to find ways to use the internet. He said now networks drive business.
Yes.
And I think that in education this is true. And so what scares me is he may be right in his argument.
Right.
But networks are driving everything now. And if if this is the road you go down, you're going to lose.
I think that it's not an either or, though. I think that there needs to be a synthesis of these two. You can get such high quality transmission of information and high quality teaching and the convenience factor. So you reduce the cost for online education. But at the same time, there is no substitute for a relationship. If all the contact a parent had with their kid, even if you could robotize everything else, was via an internet channel, how unsatisfying, how warped that child would be.
Right.
So we need hands-on.
Right.
Sorry.
But my thing with that is I totally agree with that as far as parenting is concerned. But when it comes to education, sooner or later a pilot who's learning how to fly a plane, sooner or later they are in a cockpit flying a plane. And to me, that's the bottom line. At some point during your education, at some point during that process, you got to be pastoring, but you got to have, I think a lot of times we've thrown people out to, Matthew, we were talking, this was in the chat room, Matthew graduated college, went straight to being a solo pastor. Straight to being a solo pastor. There's no manual for that. No, there's no. How many days did you sit in your office and be like, oh dear? I mean, there's days. I was in youth ministry 14 years, so I mean, it wasn't my first rodeo in a church. But there's days I'm like, there's no, and it doesn't matter if you're in the classroom online. I mean, there's situations you're going to face. I do think it's so important. You've got to emphasize being mentored and mentoring somebody. You've always got to have a Timothy and a Paul relationship.
Right. Well, some of our schools have that built in, but I don't think we use it as much as we should. So, like, say for example, the ministry majors that I don't feel like, looking back on the experience, that the internship program that we were required to do was in depth enough.
Amen.
I really don't.
Right.
And then I hear from Bethany Bible College, and here's what some of those guys do. Like, they do a full year.
They have to do
there.
6 of their 8 semesters. They have to be involved in some sort of internship.
Right, but I knew a guy who's at least a semester or two wasn't even in classes, was just at a church working that whole time.
Yes.
As part of that, and I think that I think too. So I don't want to pin it all on the teachers and leaders at schools and institutions, because I think some of it takes initiative, and I think you as a person have to know going into this game, if we want to call it a game of the pastorate, you've got to know that it's work, and you need to surround yourself with people who have been in the trenches, know what's going on, and not just be a mentor, but seek mentorship. I mean, that's been the biggest thing for me, even as a pastor, Heath. Yeah, in going straight out of college into a church, there are times when situations would arise. I would think I know, okay, here's what I probably am going to do, but before I do that, I probably ought to seek some good counsel. And I'd make phone calls, and I'd ask around and say, I need some help. I'm not quite sure how I should handle this situation. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Is that right? Should I, approach it from a different way? And there were times when I was right, and times when I needed a little bit of correction and direction to get going the direction that I needed to go.
The where I'm at now, I'm pastoring 2 churches. I'm trying to see, can we work together? Is there possibility of partnering, of merging? And I'm probably going to go to Southern Wesleyan after we get done today, and I'm just like, what an opportunity. I mean, this, there's not a whole lot of opportunities like this in any denomination. And I just want a couple of students to say, I'm not going to tell you how to do all this. Help me figure this thing out. How do we make this work?
What I'm excited about is I've finally been in this for 5 years. I'm close enough to Southern Wesleyan where now I can take on, I think you have to be in ministry for 5 years before you can take a student into a mentoring thing, and I think I'm finally at that point where I can contact them and say, hey, we're only 12 minutes away.
Yes.
Love to have somebody to, if they'd like to have that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Heath, I don't want you to show that list to anyone, but how many are on the list here for today's giveaway in the chat?
I've shown it.
Yeah,
he hasn't seen it. I just want to know how many are. He's
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
You have 6 there, TG?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes.
Good. All right. So, Steve, you're going to pick the winner today by just a number. It's 1 through 6.
Okay. 1 through 6.
1 through 6. Now, just think on that. I want you to do your whole. Was it Karnak? Was that the Karnak the Great?
I could tell you. I mean, you could listen to the process. It's going right now. I was born on the 4th day of the 4th month in the year 1957.
So what's the number?
4 plus 5 plus 7 is
no
higher than what we got.
No.
Okay, so, what's the number?
So the number's 2.
Well, good. The number's 2. Who is it, Heath? Who's our winner?
Jeremy!
Hey!
All right, Jeremy. Good.
Jeremy, this will get out in the mail today. This book right here. We'll get that to you, and you should have it by week's end.
Now, for those of you that may be listening to this in a downloaded or YouTube form, please head over to Facebook, like the Techology Show, and tag our show, and we have one more copy to give away. We'll give it away that way. We can let people that didn't win in on this too. So yeah, if you guys that are with us in the chat room, you guys are the beneficiaries of 2 attempts to win. So be sure to go to Facebook, tag the Techology Show for your chance to win.
All right. Let's let you know what's coming up on August the 31st. We'll have Dr. Bob Cranston. He's a medical doctor in the Free Methodist Church. Also, Paige Cunningham will be discussing Bob's book, Bioethics and Today's Christian at Golden Grove. We are actually using this for our quarterly over the next 3 months. So I'll have a little bit more to say about that, but really looking forward to having them on the show. All right, Heath, where can our listeners find you?
They can find me at chaseyourline.com or heathmullican.com, and from there, join me on this social media adventure that we're all on.
You're beautiful, man.
Hey, we forgot our funny story on the way out, and I do have one.
Oh, hey, okay.
Yes, that we need to touch on real quick. I just about forgot.
Yeah, okay.
The funny story is this: I hear we had our Techology Show minions keeping an eye on you while you were on vacation this week, and they tell me that you shot bottle rockets at your daughter. So, Tony, that is our closing story for today. You want to enlighten us as to what that was all about?
Well, it's...
Wait a minute. DSS is calling.
It's this thing about you need to watch out who you hang around, and it's the influence of someone bad. So, Paul Sheets, I'm at the Sheets house, and Paul has this gun that he's made, and you have a pizza box as a little shield, and so you shoot, and you put the bottle rockets in, you light them, and you shoot them at one another.
When I was a kid, we had the common decency to fire them right out of the box. We took Roman candles and bottle rockets and shot each other. What are you doing? Developing all this
I've actually got
artillery?
A video clip of this. I can give it to you, and we'll have it. We'll tag it as how not to use bottle rockets.
Wait, what state were you in?
Pennsylvania.
A state of
Are bottle
confusion.
rockets legal?
Hey.
Because they're not legal.
We're
in
not
South
under
Carolina.
law, but
Plead
under
the
grace,
fifth.
Paul would remind you.
I don't think they're legal in South Carolina anymore. But when I was cleaning out my desk at Central First, I found a whole case of those things, and we shot them.
Listen, on the advice of my lawyer, I choose not to answer that question. All right, Steve.
They can't reach me anywhere for a couple of weeks.
Why?
I'm going to be in Kansas City, where, by the way, they've had
Going
riots,
to
and the
Kansas
mayor was
City.
almost shot Sunday
Because
night.
you're coming?
Kansas
Just
City,
just
here I
blocks
come.
just blocks from Nazarene Theological Seminary. They had all this trouble, and tear gas wouldn't move the crowd, so they put down pepper spray. I never heard of them putting down clouds of pepper spray before, but they did. So that's where I'll be.
By the way,
you can
this
pray
is your
for me.
prediction coming true. Listen, seriously, back in May, you said you watch and see what this summer holds. And
Well, I was saying it even earlier before the spring came. Just the economic situation and some other things that I don't have time to go into right now, but
yeah,
and it's disheartening. It's all across America.
It is.
And I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet.
have you seen the flash mobs that go into grocery stores,
Yes.
convenience stores?
Yeah.
They
Yes.
come in.
Yeah.
There are 36 that came into a store 2 days ago, and they're laughing and they're just grabbing stuff off the shelves and walking out.
Our social fabric, which has always been by common consent, some are dissenting from.
Yeah.
And there's no way to have a free society where that exists. No rule of law.
Totally agree.
So you can reach me at facebook.com/steve.stanley, but that's about it. Or you can send me a private love letter at pastorses@gmail.com.
Wow.
SES.
SES.
Okay.
Yes, SES.
TG.
Super evangelism served.
Wow.
Go ahead. Where can they find you, TG?
MatthewTG.com. Thanks for joining us today on the Technology Show.
You can find me at facebook.com/AKC64. If you want to do further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com, or better yet, leave us a voicemail by calling us at 3049-TEOLOGY. That's 304-986-5649. Leave us a message. We may even play your comments on the air. As always, we want to thank everyone in the chat room and for those of you that download this show and listen or view it later. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios.